Thomas walked slowly, carrying an old metal box, and no one expected that what was hidden inside would leave everyone speechless. His name was Thomas. His body was no longer as strong as it used to be. His steps were heavy, but his grip on the metal box was so tight, like someone refusing to lose the only precious thing left. No one in the reunion hall could ignore the box, because its rusty glow looked so out of place among the clean uniforms of the other veterans. The reunion was held in a small town hall on the outskirts of Texas, a place where former soldiers usually gathered, sharing memories, laughing about old wounds, and going home with renewed spirit. But this year felt different. From the moment Thomas arrived, all eyes were fixed on him and the box. Some old friends, including Jenkins, a sharpshooter, tried to talk to Thomas. They patted his shoulder, asked about his health, and mentioned the box. Thomas only gave a faint smile, then said quietly, "Not yet." Those words only made people even more curious. Almost every corner of the hall buzzed with whispers. Maybe it's a Medal of Honor, or classified military papers. It could even be money from a secret mission. As the afternoon went on, the talk about the box never stopped. A local journalist named Luis, who came to cover the reunion, also watched closely. He scribbled notes in a small book, observing Thomas carefully. For him, a veteran guarding an old metal box that closely must carry a great story, maybe even something worthy of national news. Meanwhile, Thomas kept sitting in the corner of the hall, looking down at the rusty box, his fingers slowly moving across its rough surface. His eyes seemed distant, as if his mind was drifting back to a past no one else could imagine. The reunion went on, with patriotic songs and speeches from a Veterans Association leader. Some tried to pay attention, but they still stole glances toward Thomas, waiting for the moment he might finally open the box. When the lights in the hall began to dim at dusk, Thomas stood up slowly, hugging the box even tighter, and walked toward the door. Some people called out, trying to stop him, but he only turned with a thin smile, then left without saying another word. That night, the talk about Thomas and the old metal box would not die down. No one knew what was really locked inside, but it was clear the box carried something heavier than just rusted metal. Tomorrow would be the second day of the reunion, and everyone began to wonder if the secret inside would stay buried or finally be revealed before their eyes. From the moment Thomas stepped out of the reunion hall that evening, the rumors about the box grew wilder than ever. Even before dawn, messages flew through group chats, gossip filling every phone of the veterans still staying at the local inn. Someone claimed they had seen Thomas crying while holding the box alone near the bus station. Another said he was talking to himself, mentioning names no one recognized. The more the story spread, the more people felt something truly mysterious was hidden inside. The next morning, the reunion hall buzzed with uneasy excitement. People gathered early, trying to spot Thomas if he returned. Banners still hung from the ceiling celebrating the courage and loyalty of the veterans, but a real attraction was that rusted box that refused to reveal its story. Jenkins, who had served beside Thomas in Afghanistan, looked worried. He knew Thomas better than anyone. Thomas was never the type to chase attention, never the type to show off. If he was guarding something that tightly, it had to mean more than medals or souvenirs. As guests trickled back into the hall, Luis, the journalist, arrived with his camera. He was determined to get to the bottom of it, and maybe even land the biggest story of his career. Hours passed, and finally the old door creaked open. Thomas entered, carrying the same box, as if he had never put it down at all. His uniform was neatly pressed, boots polished, but his eyes looked more tired than yesterday. He nodded politely to everyone, ignoring the glances that followed him from every direction. Jenkins stepped forward to greet him, trying to sound casual. "You doing all right, buddy?" Thomas nodded. "I'm fine." "People are talking," Jenkins continued carefully. "You know, about the box." Thomas sighed, placing the box on the table in front of him, one hand still resting on top of it. "They can talk," he said, voice quiet but steady. "I know what I'm doing." His words made Jenkins pause. Deep down, he trusted Thomas, but the tension in the air was hard to ignore. The crowd began to grow around them, some pretending to look at old photos on the wall, others standing right behind Thomas, waiting. The hall felt different now. charged with quiet electricity. Every breath seemed to hold a question. What was inside that box? But Thomas would not open it yet. Instead, he straightened his back and told everyone, "Let's focus on why we're here. We're here for each other." The reminder seemed to break the spell for a moment. People clapped, some embarrassed for letting their curiosity get out of hand. But even as the group tried to go back to their stories, their eyes kept darting to that table, to the box that was still sealed tight under Thomas's hand. No one could tear themselves away completely. In a place built on brotherhood and loyalty, secrets had no place to hide for long. As the second day of the reunion rolled on, a strange restlessness filled the air. No one could shake the image of that battered metal box, and the look in Thomas's eyes when he guarded it so fiercely. The sun poured through the high windows of the hall, shining on rows of medals, faded photographs, and folded flags displayed on tables. Usually, these symbols of sacrifice were the center of attention, but today, all seemed overshadowed by the mystery Thomas had brought. During a break between speeches, Jenkins finally sat down across from Thomas. His voice was low, careful. "Thomas," he began, "if there's something you need to share, you know you can trust us." Thomas studied him for a moment, then looked away, his hand tightening on the handle of the box. "Trust has nothing to do with it," Thomas replied softly. "This isn't about me." The words were enough to confuse Jenkins, but he chose not to press. Meanwhile, the journalist Luis circled closer, acting like he was just adjusting his camera settings, but his focus was locked on Thomas. He even tried to catch a glimpse inside whenever Thomas lifted the box to shift its weight. But Thomas never let the lid move, not even a fraction. As the afternoon rolled into evening, the reunion program continued with a short remembrance ceremony. One by one, names of fallen soldiers were read aloud. A bell rang after each name, echoing through the silent hall. Thomas stood with the others, bowing his head, but there was a distant pain in his eyes, as if each name was another burden he carried. When the ceremony ended, an awkward silence followed. Nobody wanted to be the first to break it. Then, slowly, Thomas stepped forward, placing the box on a stand near the podium. "I want to say something," he announced, his voice carrying across the room. Every conversation died instantly. Thomas looked down at the box, breathing deeply. "This box," he said, tapping the lid lightly, "holds more than just metal and paper. It holds what's left of the people we couldn't bring home." A hush fell over the crowd. "But it's not yet time," he added. "Not until we're all here tomorrow." He closed his eyes, as if pushing away memories too heavy to bear. Then he picked up the box again, returned to his seat, and sat down without another word. The veterans around him traded glances, torn between respecting Thomas's wishes and battling their own desperate curiosity. For the rest of that night, every conversation circled back to that box. The tension was now impossible to ignore, and still, no one could guess the truth Thomas carried inside. The sun had set completely when the veterans began to leave the hall one by one, their goodbyes quiet, their thoughts elsewhere. Even after music and laughter, everyone left with the same image burned into their minds. Thomas, guarding that old metal box like his own heart was locked inside it. The night air outside was cool, rustling the flags that hung on the poles near the entrance. Thomas waited until the last people were gone, then stepped out slowly, still clutching the box against his chest. He made his way to a small motel across the street, the same place many veterans were staying. As he entered the lobby, the clerk greeted him kindly, but Thomas only nodded, too weighed down by something deeper than exhaustion. In his room, he set the box gently on the table by the bed. The lamp cast a warm light across its rough surface, picking up every dent and scrape. Thomas traced each line on the metal with trembling fingers, breathing unsteadily, memories flashing in and out his mind like broken film reels. He sat there for a long time, lost in silence, hearing only the faint sound of traffic outside. He thought about the letters inside, thought about every name written on them, thought about the faces of the soldiers who had trusted him with their last words. For years, he had carried their voices, keeping them safe, waiting for the right moment to let them be heard. But was this truly the right moment? The doubt clawed at him, refusing to leave. Meanwhile, across the motel hallway, Jenkins couldn't sleep. He replayed Thomas's words over and over in his head. What's left of the people we couldn't bring home? What could that mean? Jenkins stood, crossed the hallway, and knocked gently on Thomas's door. No answer. He knocked again. After a long pause, the door opened just a crack, revealing Thomas's tired face. "Can I come in?" Jenkins asked. Thomas hesitated, then nodded, stepping aside. The room smelled faintly of old cologne and polished boots. Jenkins's eyes went straight to the box on the table. "Thomas," he began carefully, "you don't have to carry this alone." Thomas lowered his gaze. "I know," he whispered, voice nearly breaking. "But they trusted me. I gave them my word." Jenkins placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then let us help you keep that promise," he said. Thomas looked at him, eyes glassy with held-back tears. For a moment, he seemed ready to let go, to finally share what had weighed on him for decades. But instead, he tightened his grip on the box again, as if afraid that speaking the truth too soon might break him completely. "Tomorrow," Thomas said hoarsely, "tomorrow I will open it." Jenkins nodded slowly, respecting his decision, and stepped back out of the room. As the door closed, Thomas sank into a chair by the window, staring at the box under the lamp's glow. Outside, the neon motel sign buzzed through the darkness, and somewhere in the distance, a train rumbled past, carrying away secrets, while Thomas kept holding on to his. The third morning of the reunion arrived with a heavy silence. The veterans gathered once more at the hall, but this time, no one laughed or shared jokes over steaming coffee like before. It was as if the entire room was holding its breath, waiting for Thomas to appear with that mysterious box. Even the decorations seemed to fade into background, the flags, the medals, the framed photos on the walls. Everyone's attention was fixed on the door, wondering when it would open. When Thomas finally walked in, there was a hush that spread to the crowd. He looked tired, older than the day before, but determined. In his hands, the box sat like a silent promise, waiting to be fulfilled. Jenkins stepped forward, relief and concern crossing his face at the same time. "You ready?" he asked gently. Thomas nodded, though his hands trembled. They moved to the front of the hall, where a simple wooden podium stood. Thomas placed the box on top of it, running his fingers across the battered lid, as if gathering the strength to open it. The veterans formed a quiet circle around him. Some stood with hats pressed against their chests, others with arms folded, their faces a mix of respect and raw curiosity. Luis, the journalist, stood off the side with his camera lowered, realizing that no photograph could ever truly capture what was about to happen. Thomas took a breath. "For years," he began, his voice steady but low, "I have carried these memories with me. I kept them safe because I made a promise to those who could not come home." He paused, letting the words sink in. "They trusted me to deliver what they could not," he continued, voice shaking now. Their last words. A chill moved through the hall, as if even the air itself was listening. Slowly, with a soft click, Thomas unlatched the box. Everyone leaned forward, straining to see. But Thomas did not open it all the way yet. Instead, he looked around the room, making eye contact with the friends who had fought beside him, who had survived the same hellish battles. "These letters," he said, voice breaking, "belong to all of you, too. I can't do this alone." Jenkins stepped forward, placing a steadying hand on Thomas's shoulder. "We're here," he said firmly. Thomas nodded, drawing a shaky breath, preparing himself for the moment that would change everything. The lid of the old metal box creaked open, just an inch, revealing the edges of envelopes, yellowed by time, carefully stacked. The room fell completely silent, waiting for Thomas to show them what he had carried for so many years. But before he could reach inside, a voice from the back of the hall called out, breaking the stillness. "Wait," the voice said. Everyone turned. An older woman stood near the doorway, her hands trembling, tears already streaking her cheeks. "I think," she whispered, "one of those letters might be for me." The veteran stared at her, stunned, as Thomas slowly closed the box again, his eyes wide with shock. He had not expected anyone to claim those words so soon. The woman stood frozen near the doorway, the weight of years pressing on her shoulders. She looked fragile yet unshakable, like someone who had waited a lifetime for this moment. Thomas stepped down from the podium, the box still in his hands. The hall was so quiet he could hear his own breath, hear the creak of the floorboards as he walked toward her. "What did you say?" Thomas asked, voice unsteady. The woman wiped her tears and tried to speak again. "My brother," she managed to say. "He served with you. His name was Henry." The name cut through Thomas's chest like a knife. Memories flooded back. A young soldier, laughing in the desert sun, fearless even in the worst firefights. "Henry, I remember him," Thomas whispered. The woman nodded, clutching a small locket around her neck. "They told us he died," she continued. "But there was never a letter, never goodbye." Thomas's hands trembled. He looked down at the old metal box, then slowly knelt in front of her. "There is a letter," he said, his voice breaking. "It's here." The woman gasped, covering her mouth with shaking hands. The veterans around them stood in complete silence, witnessing something deeper than any medal or honor, a piece of a soldier's soul returning home. Thomas opened the box carefully, revealing the letters stacked inside. The paper had yellowed, the ink had faded, but each envelope still carried the names of those lost. He pulled out one, his fingers gently brushing over Henry's name. "This is yours," he said, holding it out to her. She took it as if it might crumble in her hands, staring at the name written in shaky handwriting. Tears spilled down her cheeks, soaking into the envelope before she could even open it. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for keeping it safe." Thomas felt a lump in his throat, so strong he could hardly breathe. "He asked me to," Thomas said. "He trusted me." The woman nodded, clutching the letter to her chest, as if it were her brother's heartbeat come back to life. Around them, other veterans stepped closer, their eyes drawn to the rest of the letters still waiting inside the box. The truth could not stay buried anymore. Tomorrow, Thomas thought, tomorrow we will deliver them all. But tonight, in that small reunion hall in Texas, the first letter had finally found its way home. The hall stayed hushed long after the woman left, holding her brother's letter against her heart as if she might never let it go. The veterans stood in small groups, whispering softly, too moved to break the spell that had settled over them. Thomas felt like a dam had cracked open inside him. Years of silence, of carrying other men's last words, suddenly felt too heavy to bear alone. He looked down at the box again, realizing that each letter had a heartbeat of its own, waiting to be heard. Jenkins stepped beside him, his voice steady. "Thomas, you did the right thing," he said. Thomas nodded, though his eyes stayed on the letters. "I couldn't let them disappear," he answered, voice raw. "They deserve to be remembered." Outside, dusk had turned to night. The yellow glow of the hallway lights spilled into the meeting room, casting long shadows. A few of the veterans, encouraged by the moment, approached the podium where the box still rested. Their voices were cautious, almost afraid. "Do you have one for me?" Thomas looked at them with a quiet ache in his chest. "Maybe," he said. "We will look together." One by one they came forward, men who had once fought side by side, asking about fathers, brothers, sons. Each time Thomas lifted another envelope, the names written there seemed to echo through the walls, waking up memories buried for decades. As more letters were handed over, the air grew thicker with emotion. Some men stood silently, clutching unopened envelopes, unable to find the courage to read them right away. Others broke down in tears the moment they saw the familiar handwriting. Voices from the past returned to ink on fragile paper. Thomas felt himself trembling again, overwhelmed by the weight of so many stories. He wondered how he had carried it alone for so long, how he had survived all those years with a box full of last goodbyes pressing on his soul. And yet, seeing each letter return to its rightful family, he felt something inside him ease. A burden he had once thought he would take to his grave was now shared, piece by piece. By midnight, nearly half the letters had found their way home. The box was still half full, but Thomas no longer felt alone in guarding it. For the first time in years, he allowed himself a moment of peace. He looked at Jenkins, who was helping comfort a crying veteran, and nodded in silent gratitude. There was still work to do tomorrow, still many letters left to deliver, but tonight they had taken the first step, and that, Thomas thought, was enough to keep going. The next morning arrived with a soft rain tapping against the reunion hall's windows, as if even the sky was paying its respects. The veterans gathered again, their faces solemn but somehow lighter than before, no longer carrying only questions, but also answers, no matter how painful. Thomas entered, carrying the old metal box that had grown lighter, its burden slowly shared. He placed it on the same podium where he had stood before, looking out across the group with a new calm in his eyes. "We still have more," he said simply. The men and women around him nodded. One by one, families and fellow soldiers stepped forward. Thomas reached into the box, drawing out each letter with careful hands, reading the names aloud. Each envelope felt like a final salute to those who had never come home, a tribute that could not be bought with medals or monuments. Sometimes the name brought cries of recognition. Other times, a deep, silent grief that settled over the room like a heavy blanket. But no one turned away. No one let Thomas stand alone. As the rain continued outside, Thomas felt memories pushing into him, trying to drown him with guilt and regret. Could I have done more? But as he placed each letter into the hands of loved ones, he saw their tears, their relief, and he knew he had honored their trust. By the afternoon, there were only a few envelopes left. Thomas traced the names gently, feeling the paper almost crumble under his fingertips. He thought about every promise he had made to those men in their final moments, the way they had begged him, "Please, let them know I was thinking of them." He had carried those promises through desert winds, enemy fire, nightmares that never truly left him. And now, after all these years, the last few would finally be delivered. He looked out at the remaining families, gathered and waiting with quiet hope. "These are yours," he told them, voice stronger than it had been in years. And so, one by one, the final letters left the box. The hall felt lighter, as if the ghosts of the past had been allowed to speak and could finally rest. Jenkins stepped up beside Thomas, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You did it," he said softly. Thomas closed his eyes, breathing in the rain-cooled air, feeling the freedom of having kept his word. "We did it," he corrected, a faint smile breaking through. Outside, the rain began to ease, the clouds slowly parting to reveal a fragile blue sky. In that moment, Thomas realized he could finally let go, not of the memories, but the weight that had nearly crushed him. The box was empty, but his heart was finally full. As the last letter found its way home, a deep hush settled over the hall. The veterans stood together, heads bowed, no longer burdened by the mystery that had hung over them since the reunion began. The air felt cleansed, the weight of countless unspoken goodbyes finally lifted. Thomas looked down at the empty metal box resting on the podium. For years, it had been his prison, a silent reminder of promises he could not yet fulfill. Now, it was just a piece of cold, rusted steel, stripped of its power. He lifted the box carefully, almost surprised by how light it felt without those letters inside. Jenkins approached, studying his friend with pride. "What will you do with it now?" he asked softly. Thomas paused, then ran a weathered hand across the rough surface. "I think I'll keep it," he said, a hint of a smile breaking through. "To remember them." Jenkins nodded in understanding. Around them, the families who had received their letters gathered in small groups, hugging, sharing stories, crying, and sometimes even laughing through their tears. The letters had done more than deliver words. They had stitched back together pieces of broken hearts, given people a chance to heal wounds that had festered in silence for decades. Outside, the sun was breaking to the last of the rain clouds, casting a golden light across the worn wooden floor of the hall. Thomas stepped outside to feel the warmth on his skin, breathing deeply, his chest lighter than it had been in years. He looked at the sky, remembering every face, every name, every whispered wish he had carried through battlefields and nightmares. For the first time since leaving Afghanistan, he felt whole. The box might be empty, but his heart was full of the courage, the loyalty, and the final words of those who had trusted him. As the wind rustled the flags on their poles, Thomas closed his eyes, allowing himself a single moment of peace. No medals, no news stories, no parades could ever measure up to what they had just done. The true tribute had been delivered, letter by letter, heart to heart. And now, Thomas would finally rest, knowing it honored every promise he made, until the very end. The reunion hall slowly emptied as families went home, carrying their letters like fragile treasures. The echo of conversations and quiet tears lingered in the air, but a calm had returned, woven through every heart that had been touched by those long-lost words. Thomas stayed behind, standing alone by the stage where the box had rested just hours earlier. The sun had dipped low, painting long shadows across the wooden floor, turning the hall golden. He ran his fingers across the empty box one last time, as if saying goodbye to an old companion. For so long, this piece of dented metal had carried voices that were too precious to lose. Now its duty was done. Jenkins walked up to him, a soft smile on his face. "You ready to go home?" Thomas nodded slowly. "Yeah," he replied, voice steady. "For the first time in a long time, I think I am." Together, they stepped outside into the evening light. A gentle breeze tugged at their sleeves, carrying the scent of grass and warm earth. As they walked toward the parking lot, a group of younger soldiers stood nearby, saluting quietly in respect. Thomas paused, looking at them, then returned the salute with slow, measured pride. Those young men and women would go on to carry their own burdens, face their own battles, and maybe even guard their own promises someday. Thomas hoped they would never have to hold on to a secret for as long as he had. He turned to Jenkins. "I'm glad you were here," he said. Jenkins gave a firm nod. "You're not alone, brother," he answered. The two men climbed into Jenkins's old pickup truck, the engine rattling to life. As they pulled away from the hall, Thomas glanced once more at the reunion building growing smaller behind them. It felt like leaving behind a chapter of his life that had finally been closed. The letters were gone, delivered. The box was empty. And in Thomas's heart, a quiet strength remained. A final salute to every soldier who had trusted him with their last breath. No applause, no bright medals. Just a simple, unspoken knowledge that he had done what was right. The road stretched ahead of them, long and quiet. For the first time in years, Thomas felt free enough to follow it wherever it might lead. And that was the greatest tribute he could ever give the fallen.